All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Built to Scale. And I am really excited. I say that I'm really excited with every guest, but I am really excited for Ted Turner here that,
And do you say that too? But this time I really am.
yes, this time I really am. The last guy, not so much. I just said that for him, but for Ted, this is real, right? So, no, appreciate having you on, Ted. That for our audience, Ted Turner is a leadership coach in the construction industry that I've gotten to know Ted personally and just have really appreciated getting to know who he is personally and what he personally believes and his values, his core values as a person. But yeah, Ted is actually a leadership coach that works with several different regions for ABC, Associated Builders and Contractors, AGC, some of these different organizations. There's lots of acronyms for all these too, right, Ted? But lots of construction organizations, and he is a leadership coach at several of these different regional organizations around the Houston area, Austin as well. But yeah, just really appreciate having Ted on because there's a lot of people that are leadership coaches. But in my experience, Ted, that I don't know that they've earned the chops to be a leadership coach, right? And what I appreciate about your background is that you were in a general management and chief operations role for very significant sized construction companies in your career for many, many years before, stepping into this next evolution of life and your career, where now you're really pouring in to helping people become better leaders in the construction industry, realizing, I'm sure that, you're fully aware of this, but, just realizing there are employment gaps, employment concerns in the industry. And so if we can make, construction businesses better places to work with better leadership, that's how we get talent, right? And so just really appreciate having you on that. So excited to have you here, Ted.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the invite. And yeah, I spent 40 years in ops and construction. I started on my tools and finished in the C-suite. And there are certainly things I haven't done in construction, but that is a short list. And if anybody stumbles across this that's young in their career or wanting what to do, I am an unashamed cheerleader for construction. College for me or construction for me was just going to be a way to pay for college. And I loved it. And I spent 40 years in that space. And most of my clients are construction engineering outfits. So it is just, it is probably the industry with the most opportunity. Whatever turns you on, whatever your hot button is, there's a path in construction.
I think too, to that point, and I'm okay if we go down this rabbit trail a bit, but to that point, realizing that some of these industries that don't particularly seem that sexy for young people, I think because there is that gap of, not enough entrants, new entrants are coming into the industry. I just encourage young people to really take a look because you can accelerate really quickly in your career because there are gaps in that, the old timers, that are retiring or that are heading into retirement, there's not always enough people to come and backfill. And so, you put in some time and, in your 30s, you could easily be a very high level executive within, a particular business in the construction industry. And that isn't necessarily true of other industries. And so a lot of opportunity for the right people that are hungry. And so very thankful that we have folks like you working to develop them too, Ted. So this is good. But yeah, so for our audience, Ted and I were discussing like what do we want to talk, because I just really wanted Ted on the podcast. That Ted brings a wealth of knowledge, and like you said, in all areas of construction businesses, he's done a lot of things, and I'm sure that this is not the last time that we'll have Ted on the podcast, revealing his insights for our audience. But one of the things that Ted's experience in P&L management and really trying to help construction businesses grow and scale, managing the entire operations of construction businesses, that's, something really unique about Ted's background. And so, that those are things that for many of our listeners and many of our business owners, I would say that a lot of our, even clients in Brady CFO, they're the owner that they're somewhat stuck in managing operations and they want to figure out how to build a team that can manage it so that they've taken the risk of trying to build the business up to a certain point and they're trying to figure out, how do I manage this without me being in the guts of this 24/7, right? And so one of the themes is, hey, you have to measure and manage your business by a set of metrics and numbers too, right? That you have to have things that tell you whether something's off and whether you're pointing and going towards your North Star. And so today we're going to be diving into what are relevant KPIs and metrics that construction businesses should be looking at on a regular basis to better manage their business. What are some of the things that construction businesses should be specifically looking at? And that's the key here. I think there's a lot of advice out there in regards to different financial metrics that companies should be looking at, but really we're going to be trying to deep dive with Ted today about what are relevant for construction businesses. And so, we're going to try to go as granular as possible in this too. And there might be some additional episodes that come with this, but for right now, we're going to dive in and figure this out. So, first, Ted, what is your opinion on scorecards, dashboards? What is your overarching opinion of the success or what makes these things successful and why companies should be utilizing KPIs and metrics to help run their business?
Well, the answer is kind of in your question: to help run their business. There's two major reasons why you would want some KPIs. One is purely informational, to look at a dashboard quickly and get some information, some data. But it really becomes powerful when you use it to influence your decisions. And, we'll dive into any aspect of this, but I kind of faced this myself in preparing for this podcast, because I've been focusing on coaching for a few years. So while I've got decades of experience looking at KPIs, and I spent considerable time running the controls department and the services department, and I found myself really having a lack of focus. The memory starting coming back, and different things I looked at, and things behind it, and the things that drive the KPIs, the EVMS, and all those kinds of things. And I got all over the place. And I told you earlier, I mean, I started taking notes to stay on track, and then I think I came up with a whole workshop, because now I've got 3 documents I put together, and I realized I'm all over the place. And then with your question, that's really kind of an example of what people can fall into, the trap people can fall into with data. We have such an ability to collect data now and parse the data and show it in so many different ways, but that doesn't mean it's helpful, right? And so a KPI is a behavioral indicator. It goes beyond just the facts and figures of whatever it is you're measuring, but it goes to the alignment between the priorities and the mission and the culture of your company as well. And so there's so much data out there. Often, if I take over a new division or a new company or whatever it was, and the first meeting we're going through data, I'd ask the question about every KPI, every report that came up. Why are we using this? What is it doing for us? Does anybody at this table actually use this report? Oh, yeah, I use it. Okay, great. Tell me when's the last time it influenced a decision you made and how it influenced that decision. And I've been surprised how often it falls apart right there. You can take the surface level of useful KPIs. Okay, I know in my mind this KPI has to be within these numbers, within these parameters, and the business is doing good. But if it's outside of those parameters, do you understand what that KPI is telling you? What story is it telling you? And when I first got moved into controls, I was not excited about that. I'm an operations guy. I want to move that crane. I want to load that thing. I want to, but I just got so excited about what the story is that's being told about those KPIs. So if you move out of those parameters, are you just guessing about the decision you need to make? Or do you understand what that KPI is telling you? What feeds that KPI? So those that are using these KPIs and these reports to make decisions really need to understand, maybe not as deeply as the people gathering the data, but they need to understand what it means, where it comes from. And I'll give you an example. If we talk about, I know you're more focused on finance, but schedule affects your financial position. I can remember sitting in a meeting, progress meeting early on, a large project, large industrial project, about $900 million. And we're presenting the schedule. And our scheduler is telling the senior VP and the rest of the team, you need to hire some more engineers. You need to assign more people to this. You're falling behind on your schedule. This is going to become critical. And I remember the senior vice president literally slamming his hand on the desk and saying, I refuse to believe I need to add more people. I'm looking at your screen. we're supposed to be, and I'm making these numbers, but I don't remember what it was. We're supposed to be 3% done, and we're 4.5% done. I'm doing just fine. So why the disconnect? There's a misunderstanding of what's feeding that data. And we had to explain to him over the course of several meetings and waste several months and millions of dollars to help him understand you're gaining all your progress on parking lot design and the parking structure and the communications in the building and none of the stuff that we need. We're missing vendor data for equipment that has a 2 or 3 year lead time. And so that happens a lot. And so I'll ask Bill, why are you using this KPI? What is it supposed to do for you? Right. The KPIs should support your leaders, not enslave them. They don't drive the decisions. Um, but I don't know how you make decisions other than your gut if you don't have some kind of data. And sometimes your gut's really good, and sometimes your gut has indigestion.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, that's the foundation. They've got to serve you, and you've got to understand at least rudimentally where that data is coming from and what it's designed to do. And if I can't get an answer from people in a meeting, I'll take it out. So okay, we're not going to produce a report anymore. Now, being diligent, we are going to revisit this in a couple of months, make sure nobody said, "Oh crap, I wish we had that report." Now I know I used it, but reduce it. There's so much data out there, you can get blinded by the data. Just the sheer volume of it.
I think you brought up an interesting, concept too, that we try to, coach our clients that you can't look at one metric in isolation. Like the example and story you gave was somebody looking at something in isolation without understanding context. And it's very rare that you can look at a single metric in isolation and that is the right answer. That even from a financial standpoint, yeah, you could be profitable. That doesn't mean that you have positive cash flow, because there's a bunch of stuff that isn't sitting on your P&L that could be consuming a ton of cash, right? And we say that was a very large container of whatever you had there.
Oh, Bucky's, it's just
Oh,
water.
there we go.
It's,
Yeah.
it's well used. It's loved.
There we go. Yeah. If Bucky's got a plug on this, I'm going to have to reach out to them.
That's
So
right. They
good
need
stuff.
to give you some cash.
Yes.
Speaking of cash,
Go ahead.
no, I was just saying, go ahead. That's such an important topic, but go ahead with your thought.
No, I just, again, you can't look at something in isolation. I think also what I would encourage our audience is even when you have a set of metrics that, you could have the fanciest dashboard in the world and that, might be helpful, might not. It doesn't, you always have to be inquisitive of the data itself, that you have to be poking and asking questions about it, that not assuming that just because you're ahead of progress, like you mentioned in that example, that what does this really mean? And poking questions of it that, hey, we are ahead of progress. Why are we ahead of progress? What is leading to this? And understanding that and can't look at it in isolation. Be inquisitive of data. Those are things that we encourage. Don't take data as its face value. Be inquisitive of it too. Yeah, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear some examples of metrics that you found really work for you throughout your career. Again, we might look at some things in isolation here, which we're telling the audience not to do, but I'd love to understand some of the metrics and how you ended up using them over the course of your career. Do you have some insights for us on that?
Well, hopefully. Yeah, as I told you, for specifics, I have to reach back into my memory banks. I've been focused on coaching for the last few years. But yes, and it depends on what role you're in, whether you're a GC or a subcontractor or supplier, and really what industry you're in. A GC in the commercial market is self-performing very little work. So a lot of the KPIs, the controls falls on the subcontractor. In the industrial worker world, that's completely opposite. In the industrial world, the GC, the EPC contractor, whatever they are, is performing 80% or more of it themselves. So you really got to decide where you're at. But for me, looking at things operationally, a couple of telling things are revenue per man hour kind of stuff. How long it takes me to turn around a change order or an RFI, and I'm looking at how that spread is growing. We talk about hours burned versus hours earned. I've been surprised so many times by large and small companies where their earned value measurement system, they think that's the same thing. I've burned an hour, therefore I've earned an hour. They haven't taken into account the weighting of how they take credit, that there's no real schedule of values. So I'm looking at that revenue per man hour. I'm looking at productivity per man hour. Um, I'm looking at things like cash flow, and I'm forecasting even contingency drawdown so that my cash flow predictions are sound, so that I don't have to tap into my line of credit. You mentioned earlier, and to paraphrase, there are a lot of profitable companies that go under because they can't manage their cash. So it's not just predicting your cash flow, but understanding your conversion cycle. So I want to see that. How many days out is my cash tied up before it's provided any profit that I can use, that I can grab, right? So those are some metrics that I'm looking for. But cash, if you're a big company, small company, the old saying "cash is king" is as true today as whoever first said it. Maybe when they were building the pyramids and doing doing a project update. Um, so yeah, so how deep are you looking? Because if you understand those things, you can start to do a lot of things with your cash. You can buy down and take advantage of discounts on buy downs. You can maybe move some of your cash into a short-term instrument and let it work for it. There's just so many things you can do if you manage your cash and you understand it well. And I find a lot of companies don't really forecast that. They're on a make-believe payment cycle. Well, this should work. This is what our costs are going to be. All right, well, how much is going out versus how much is coming in, and what's the real cycle that's going to happen there? I see companies, surprisingly, what seem to be sophisticated companies, getting into the same financial traps that individuals sometimes get into. Well, this money should be in the bank at least 3 more days because that check probably won't clear, and they won't be able to take my money. So I can write another check, even though it might be. I'm okay. That's a death knell, right? You know this. So those are some of the big things: is my cash on hand, my accounts receivable aging, work in progress, my gross project margin. Are we hitting targets? Is it slipping? Is it better than forecasted? Um, and I'll even look at things not as intently, but a lot of things that people don't consider KPIs, going all the way back to the entire job life cycle. If I'm well, hopefully all companies are doing a bid no bid analysis. Part of that might include a go get analysis, meaning, is this project going to go? Is it real? How much confidence do we have in this? How sophisticated is the client? Are they paying for it off the balance sheet? Is it financing? Is financing in place? All those kinds of things. Is this project really going to go? And then the get part, how likely are we to get it? What's our competition? What's our relationship with the client? So I'll go back periodically and look at those kind of things. How accurate are we in our forecasting way back then? What's the percentage of projects that we're landing that we've targeted these we really want? Because there are some that you bid just because you need to keep that client happy. You don't want the project or you're too busy to get it. So I'll go back and measure those things periodically as well. How good are we at forecasting those things? Did this project really go? Which brings in scope. And so those things we don't typically think of when we're talking KPIs. We're talking project level KPIs, usually maybe enterprise level. But it's healthy to look at all of those things. You don't need to look at all of those things every week. You never get anything done. But on a set basis that makes sense, look at every piece of it. Your engagement surveys, pulse surveys of your people. What's the turnover rate of our folks? How are we doing on safety? Are we getting the right number, the right quality safety observations? Are we slipping on that pyramid? Um, all of that kind of stuff. What's the training metrics? How much are we spending on training on each people, and can we measure the ROI on that? So, KPIs run the gamut, and depending on what your role is, what seat you're sitting on, the importance of those shifts.
I want to kind of go down this path with you on some of these a little bit more. So, yeah, let's go down the rabbit trail a bit here. I love, what you talked about. I think you called it a go or no go analysis, correct?
Yeah, go get.
Yeah, go
Go
get
get analysis,
analysis.
and part of our bid, no bid process is that go get.
Yeah. And realizing, you know, um, right? Especially for smaller companies, say sub 100 million, they're probably not in a position to where they're issuing out, bids and proposals that they don't intend to go get. Like they want them, right? That it's, like you said, that, once you get some of these clients and they're big clients, some of it is just relationship management that that that's not really work you want to do, but you're going to end up bidding on it just to, hey, they asked for it, right? But especially for say, companies on the smaller side, that measurability of how accurate you are in your forecasting is everything. Right. And because we've sat in some client discussions, right. Where they say there could be a financial struggle where some of their jobs are not taking off quite as expected, and that they thought that they bid on the work, the proposals are in, they're accepted, et cetera, but the client is ultimately not, starting the project as quickly as they thought. And so, they may have some staff members that they're holding on to, some project managers, et cetera, that it's really hard to get good people. And so they're holding on to those, waiting for those projects to start, but they don't have clarity as to when they'll start. And there's some of that is out of your control, but I oftentimes we found it incredibly difficult with clients on the smaller size that the forecasting is just, it's all over the place. And your method is trying to understand how accurate are we on forecasting. I think this is one of those things that companies have to start to get really good at really fast, because you got to have, an entire sales system pipeline as to how many bids do you have out there? How, what's your percentage rate of how many bids you've won? What makes it that percentage rate and why? And so when you go to create a forecast in the next year and you go create a budget, that it's not one of these, this sounds about right. This is a gut call that we did 30 million or we did 50 million worth of work last year. We're going to 60 million this year. Let's throw a little factor on top of it. Right. And so, I'd love to dive into that, can you kind of explain more how you would validate the accuracy of the forecasting and actually making sure that, okay, when we say that this is what we're actually going to be able to do, and this is how much one work we have, and these are the one proposals, and this work is actually going to start. How do you go about that? What were you looking at?
Yeah, great question. And it reminds me, we had a BU, business unit president, that had what he figured to be his lucky numbers. And so every proposal that went out, and I don't remember what the numbers were, but there were 2 or 3 numbers. We have to have a 7 in this proposal, and we have to have a 3, and we have to have, and so, and I'm not exaggerating at all. Every proposal would have those 3 key numbers because those were his lucky numbers. So it is somewhat a crystal ball, and that's what makes construction, I think, one of the reasons construction is so much fun, is because there are so many dynamics that fit into this. So when you're thinking about, okay, how accurate are we on forecasting? And you brought up a very typical common issue. You've scheduled your crews, you scheduled your equipment for a job that starts here and lasts for this much time, and then it gets pushed and it gets accelerated or it gets paused or some other opportunity comes along. And so just to go off just for a second, I'll come back to your question. Another KPI that I would look at, and this was just something that was continually updated, was what I referred to euphemistically as a going out of business curve. It's really not that, but I forecasted or had those with the tools to do it, forecast our manpower usage and put it on a waterfall graph. So I can see I need to get more work here in these months. We're getting low. Or, wow, I'm going to have a tough time staffing this. And as a job moves, couple things that does for you is it brings credence when you have to go to the front of the client and say, look, you've changed the game. That this is an impact to us, and here's why it's an impact. So it may not be something that stands up all that great in court, but if you've got a good relationship with your client, you can give them the visual, this is what's happened. And it can help you plan. You can run some what if scenarios. So getting back to your question, the way you track how successful are we, how accurate are we, unfortunately, is all lagging indicators. We thought this was going to be a real project. We spent a lot of money. It never went anywhere. Okay, what did we miss? And you really, in those cases, it really is just kind of some insight. Hopefully, you build a network of competitors as well as people that you work with so that you can get some inside skinny on what really happened, what drove this, and you get some more market data. Over time, how accurate are we in this industry, or is the problem with this particular client or this particular location? Some locations, the laws are different to the point where, and I've done a lot of international stuff, so that gets fuzzy. But um, where is it? You try and drill down. Where is it that we're missing? What was the factor that was off? It used to kind of crack me up when our sales guys would come in. And I have the privilege of working with really good business development guys, but nonetheless, they'd come in, they'd say, well, we have to be around here to win this thing. And I'd always ask them, how do you know? How do you know? You know? And well, this is what our competition is going to come in. How do you know that? And I rarely got a real good answer. Now, I do think, let's pause for a second. I do think that gut and experience has some value. But that's a piece of the puzzle, not the puzzle. So, how do you measure your accuracy of your go get and what impacts it? It is a lot of that. It is a lot of parsing the data. It's some sitting around the table and pushing back on each other. What made you think this? What had to be true for this to be an accurate um, characterization or an accurate prediction? Often we miss that step of what had to be true. What assumptions did we make? Are those reasonable assumptions? What can help you on that too is doing a risk opportunity register. So that's a way you can go back and see, okay, did we just blow this risk? We just didn't see it, or did we just blow this opportunity? Or no, we had it. It was in there, but we didn't give it enough weight. So risk opportunity matter, for those that may not be real familiar with that, is just what it sounds like. Here are my risks. Here are all the things that I can think of that could go wrong. Here's how likely they are to go wrong. Here's the impact if they do. The other side of that, here's all the things that could just pop up that we didn't see as opportunities. What's the impact if they happen? What's the likelihood of them happening? And so you gather that data, you gather lessons learned data. I would digitize it so that we could search the database. And too often these lessons learned just go into the black hole and nobody ever goes back and looks at them because, for one, they're not digitized. You can't keyword search very accurately. And so we would set up on a periodic basis, I'd assign somebody to go through there, look for things. And now with AI, my goodness, it opens a whole new world of analysis, right? But somebody go through there, see if you find trends. Do you find the same things coming up, positive, negative, over and over and over again? I remember a time when we decided that we were going to go after almost exclusively ethanol projects, and we turned down negotiated cogens because our focus was ethanol. That's where the future is going to be. We didn't land a single ethanol project, not one. And we turned down hundreds of millions of dollars of work that came to us, phone calls. Please, we're not putting on the store. We just negotiate with you. You got to be able to capture those lessons. What went wrong? Why did we do this? And that starts also with people paying attention, making notes. My project controls folks, I'd always tell them, I want a note behind every. It's just like keeping a cash register, right? You got notes, of what happened. You need to do the same thing. Why did you think this? Well, we know this client. Okay, so really, is that all of it? Well, let me go back through my notes. Oh no, I had a conversation with the VP. Okay, what's our relationship with this VP? Where's he been before? She's been before. How accurate is their information? All that filters into it. It's the little pieces, as you said. You can't look at it in a microcosm. So that's a lot, right? It's a lot to capture. Unfortunately, there isn't a simple answer to how do you measure that. But those are all the things you're looking at. Now, when you're a huge company and you're chasing this work, you've got the bench that can do that. For companies where we wouldn't even bid anything under $50 million. So that's a whole different world than somebody, as you say, has got a $10, $15 million a year construction company. So, but they can go through the same process, just lighten it so that you don't get paralyzed by that or it costs you to death. You're spending a dime pursuing a penny. But what's your relationship? Keep some notes. Why did you make that decision? Was it a phone call? Was it something somebody told you at the bar? Surprisingly, some of the information you get at the bar is pretty darn accurate. I was always amazed that I usually found out we landed a project not from the owner, but from the sub. Wanted to work with us. Hey, heard you got this. Congratulations. We want to be your concrete sub. Wait, we haven't heard that. How do you know we got the job? Tap into those networks.
Yeah, I think you have a consistent theme here of gathering information, and it is a lot for business owners to consume as they're trying to evolve their business. But um, making those efforts and those concerted efforts in regards to you have to record the information accurately, but you have to get the information in somewhere so that you can do trend analysis over time. But you have to start. It can't all just sit in your head. That if you want to build something that can grow and is scalable, you have to start putting things in a database somewhere. And whatever that might look like, that might just start out with an Excel sheet at first. We usually encourage that at least start out there, and then you can refine it over time before you go make investments in massive ERP systems or CRMs, et cetera. Don't get ahead of your skis on that, but you just have to start collecting. And it's the same thing. Even I'm sure that you've probably experienced as you've down a different career path, or even that I've experienced in my business. That hey, there's a particular revenue size that when people, when the client comes and talks to us for CFO services, I'm going to already say, nope. Like, we have tried to make this work, and we have bid work, and that particular revenue segment, it just does not fit, and we're not going to spend any more time there. But you determine that through experience and putting data down and saying what happened in all of these won bids and also these lost bids, and what is the common theme, and you're inquisitive of the data, but you have to get the data down somewhere. And so that, I think that is one of the key themes, is you're speaking so much of a review of all of this information, and your data can be quantitative data coming out of a system, or it literally could be data at the bar, right? That's still relevant market data. But you have to get the data ultimately, and it has to be digestible in some form, and it has to be reviewed. I do want to keep going down, because, I think it's to that point that we're trying to encourage our audience, and what you mentioned too. It's that the data shouldn't live in these little silos. It should be talked about, right? That, in order to get better at things, especially as you have a growing enterprise, you can't have an isolated metric or a KPI that you can't just look and like, so even from a finance perspective, most people ask us, hey, should we have just be showing cash on hand on our KPI scorecard? And my first answer is always no, because, okay, you can see what amount of cash on hand. What does that tell you?
What
Tells you how
decision are
much
you
cash
going
you
to
have
make
on
with
hand.
that? Yeah, what decision are you going to make with that information?
Yeah.
If you
You're
can't
going to
take
make
an
nothing with it.
action, right? If you can't take a weekly action, it shouldn't be on your weekly scorecard.
Yeah. And so to that point, I would actually recommend for most people to really understand their liquidity properly, because even some liquidity metrics can be manipulated with certain accounting measures. If people really want to understand cash flow, I actually recommend, well, there's things like looking at your AR and your collections and how long you're waiting on, your invoices to get paid, and that you want to accelerate those. Those are important things to go work on. But if you truly want to understand cash flow, you're going to have to go into a forecast. It's not going to be a pure metric. You're going to have to go into a forecast and say, under these assumptions of what we know about how fast we collect, et cetera, this is actually what our cash on hand will take us through, and that it's okay. That the next several months are going to be okay now, because otherwise it is a blind thing. But, again, we don't want to isolate a KPI metric, but you're kind of bringing about this idea that too, once you have the data, you don't want to isolate it amongst just a couple party or a couple people too. Like, it needs to be there to breathe so that people can talk about it and say, hey, okay, this is what we've learned. And we also have this other market level data that we got from the bar last night. This should be added to the entire picture of things, but you have to let it open and let it breathe amongst multiple people so that it actually can be acted upon. Would you agree in what I'm saying there?
Yeah, yeah, and I think what you're saying is that context matters. So if you're only looking at a few things, um, you don't get the whole picture. It comes back to that old example we probably learned in grade school, right? The blind man touches the elephant's side and said, "Oh, the elephant's like a wall," and the other blind man that touches its nose, "Oh, it's like a snake." You don't get the big picture if you're not looking at all the data. The caution there is don't get bogged down in the minutia, but you need to have the full picture. But you touched on a couple of things that, if it's okay, I wanna talk about. One of these is really, well, they're all important, but one of these is really important. how do you use the KPIs? How do you have an honest conversation? And this speaks directly to leadership. How is leadership using the KPIs? Are they a coaching tool, or are they a stick to beat people with? Right. Your dashboard should lead you into directions, not blame. So, uh, how are you using that information? If people don't feel like they have some safety to share the bad with the good, it's a problem. Or if they can't bring up a question, if they don't feel like they can say, I don't understand that, or I disagree with that, you need that open discussion, different aspects. You bring an operations guy in, you bring a financial guy in, you bring an HR guy in, and you sit them at the table and let them hit the problem from different angles. You're going to come up with better solutions than it's just HR or it's just ops or whatever it happens to be. So, leadership is key here. It's not about it's about asking what do you need as opposed to who's to blame, who caused this, what happened. It doesn't solve the issue, doesn't open up the team. It builds silos. Everybody um, protects their own fiefdom. Right? They look out for each other. So that's important. When we talk about cash flow, uh, when I forecast the cash flow, I start with my schedule. And I look at when I'm gonna start outlaying money and for what. When am I gonna buy equipment? When am I gonna buy material? When am I gonna incur dunnage? All those things. Can I buy it just as I need it, have it delivered to site? Can I leverage a big order or multiple orders and have the vendor store it on site so that I have some flex with my cash flow? When am I gonna start burning man hours? When am I gonna start burning overheads? Are those overheads gonna continue to run at the same pace throughout the project? All that kind of stuff then feeds the curve. And each company has to decide, okay, what is the appropriate strategic reserve? And do you fill that strategic reserve with cash or with liquid assets of another type, or is it a letter of credit? Or what is it? And do you calculate the cost of money in that? So this is something that a big company can do and spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars and full-time people doing it, but a small company can do it with one or two people at the table if it's a small, not that complex job. So this is something every company needs to do and understand that cash and then start forecasting. What can you do in your contract to support good cash? Can you get a MOB charge? Can you get better terms with a vendor or with your supplier? Can you build in interest? The law, unless it's taken out of your contract, gives you interest. And I know a lot of contractors, big and small, are afraid to charge interest on a late invoice. I do it. I do it, and I've generally not gotten a negative response. Those few times when I've just gone in there and sat down calmly and said, "Well, listen, and this works easier if you also have a quick pay option, right, where they want some percentage back." I'll say, "Hey, this is just the other side of the coin. You guys are obviously hoping I take advantage of this. You can spend a little less cash. You're managing your cash, so you want me to take the fast pay. But, I have the option of not doing that. Well, this is just the same thing on the other side. I'm incentivizing you to pay on time. If you've made the strategic decision, that's not in your best interest. You want to incur the interest instead. Okay, I have no problem with that. But that's why
Yep.
it's on your invoice."
Yep. Exactly.
And I
No,
don't know that I'll have to really think about this, but I don't know if I've ever had to do that more than once with a client.
no, it cleans up really quick. As long as you give them the other option, right?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, and you brought up a really good point. Okay, you want to build out a cash flow forecast, and I think some people could get totally consumed by this about what it takes to do this. But at the end of the day, like what I would say is really good and interesting about the construction business is to properly put together a bid and proposal, you got to have a schedule and, you got to be tracking where you're at on your schedule at any point in time. And that's where your WIP report comes in too, right? But you have to be tracking against the schedule and you have to make adjustments to that schedule. And are you on track or not? And so a lot of it comes down, you know, managing a schedule and having an up-to-date schedule from a labor perspective, from materials perspective. Really it's a consolidated view, but really having clarity on where you're at on your jobs in regards to the schedule, realizing that, for some smaller, players, the jobs are going to be so small, they don't have a big schedule. They're not going to develop out this entire tool of a scheduling activity. But then for the bigger jobs, yes, you have to have a schedule that is tracked and, when are things going to be started? Are we delayed or not? And how much are we delayed? What is this impact going to be? But it's really, it all starts from a schedule and tracking your activities against the schedule. And are you on track or not? But that has to be filtered down to other members of the organization so that it's not just residing to you as a business owner, or like you said, you're not just cracking the whip with it, but making this data visible. But it's got to get updated quickly. It's got to be updated rapidly. I would say that this is where you got to get all that accounting information in, that, your payroll and everything, your credit card reports, all of your expense reports, all of your, material purchases, all of your vendor invoices, like they got to be running through the system as quick as humanly possible so that you do have up-to-date data. And then you can track that against your schedule to determine how you're doing. But a lot of it comes down to the schedule management itself and being finely tuned on the schedule. Would you agree in what I'm saying there?
Yeah, yeah. Your schedule's your backbone. Everything else hangs on the schedule.
Yep.
So the schedule has to be, can't have extending the metaphor, it can't have scoliosis, right?
Yep.
It's the line of your project. And so you've got to have accuracy there and timely reporting and updating and procedures for when things change. Why did they change? How do we attach this from the contractual point of view, from the scheduling point of view? And I would just say this, uh, maybe to our smaller contractors, but to the bigger ones as well. If you're competent and confident, don't let don't let the owner or the GC, if you're a sub, um, bully you into things. As we're talking about this schedule and forecasting, I remember a project I had with a large company. We were an EPC contractor. This is our client was a $10 billion a year company. I was doing a job out of state. I was based in Houston. Job was in Florida. I got a call to come down there and work out some change orders. We'd been hammering back and forth for a while, and they said, "Oh, we think we can come to agreement. Come on down here." Well, I was ambushed. They had 15 people around the table. They were all scheduling people, and all they wanted to do was beat me up on scheduling. The toughest part about this was none of them understood a schedule. We were absolutely on schedule. They're screaming about how we're off schedule. We're not going to meet their shutdown. They're going to bring in other people, penalties, all the rest of this stuff. And so you can get in delicate situations where I had to stand my ground and tell them that they don't know how to read a schedule without telling them they don't know how to read a schedule. But because we had a solid schedule, I could just let the data do the talking. This is what the schedule actually shows. And I can show you my earned value system to show that we're on track here. We have done these things, even though you don't see it. So believe in your data, but don't be so rigid in your data that you don't go, oh, maybe I better check that. Right? It's not, you can't fall into either trap. Oh, they push back. Oh no, maybe I'm wrong. And you also can't have such ownership in it that you're not willing to look and say, maybe there is a problem. But so drive your own competence. And have confidence in that competence so that you can defend what you're doing to yourself internally and to anybody externally that might need that, because they also want that reassurance. They don't want surprises. Once I convinced them they were wrong, they weren't upset that they were wrong. They were relieved that they were wrong.
Yep. Real quick, you brought up a concept there, earned value. Can you explain that concept a little bit more for our audience?
Yeah. So earned value is to simplify it. Let's keep the math easy. Let's say you're installing some pipe. You're getting paid $1 for every foot of pipe you put in. You have forecasted it's going to take you 1 man-hour to install that pipe. If we want to be profitable, let's say we spend 50 cents a man-hour, right? So if you burn a man-hour, you spend a man-hour, you should have earned $1. Simple logic. Unfortunately, that's how many companies trace their earned value. Well, I spent a man-hour, so I should get $1. But wait a minute, you're not paid to spend the man-hour. You're paid to put in the piece of pipe. So if in that 1 hour of man hours, you put in 1 foot of pipe, yes, you've earned your $1. That's your earned value for that $1 for that 1 hour that you burned. Great. Hallelujah. And you were right on your cost forecast and you're spending 50 cents an hour all in, so you're profitable. The problem is, what if it took you an hour and a half to put in that 1 foot of pipe? Or conversely, what if you put in 5 feet of pipe? So you've got to go a little more granular than that, unless it's all the same size pipe, because spools are going to go in at a different rate. Small bore pipe's going to go in at a different rate. Large bore pipe's going to go in at a different rate. Piping 400 feet up in the air is going to go in at a different rate. How much credit are you going to take for receiving the pipe? Or steel is how much credit are you going to take for receiving the steel? What percentage of that 100%? Okay, I've received it. How much for when you shake it out? How much from when you've erected it, but you haven't rattled it up, you haven't plumbed it yet, or any of that kind of stuff? How much do you get at the deep? So an EVMS needs some granularity so that you know what you're looking. Otherwise, you can come into a progress meeting and go, you pipers are burning through hours like crazy. We have an average of 1 man hour per foot. You're spending 6 man hours. What is wrong with you? And that superintendent may push back and say, the pipe I'm putting in right now should be at about 20 man hours. I'm making you money. But if you don't understand your earned value, you're going to panic. Or you can go the other way. With the senior vice president, right? I refuse to believe because my numbers are good. So that's earned value. How are you actually earning the value for the hours that you're burning?
There's such granularity in this, right? And I like you said, it could be different per type of pipe installation, et cetera. There's such granularity in this. What recommendations do you have to really make sure that that earned value is correct? That I realize it starts all the way back at the estimating, but how do you start with the estimates that are as accurate as possible? How do you, make sure that, especially, you could be entering something new too, right? I mean, it could be a new project, or you're trying to enter a new market and try to understand and not lose your butt on it. How do you try to start and have an appropriate assessment of what is the appropriate amount of work it takes to get that earned value correct? But what would you start with, Ted?
Well, you're generally not thinking in those terms when you're preparing an estimate, right? So, sometimes your estimators also have a cost control background, but that's not generally what they're looking at. They're generally looking at some matrices that have come back through reporting that for us, this is how long it takes us to put in a ton of steel. Again, is it lightweight steel, medium steel, whatever, but this is how many man hours it takes us to put in. Now, they're probably looking at some published documents of what's industry specific. Then they're looking at their own internal data as to how we performed in the past. And then they start saying, okay, well, but this is at height, 80% of this is at height, whereas typically it's not, or this is underground, or this is a really tight site, or all the other things that'll factor it up and down. So they're generally not even thinking about how your schedule of values, which is, part of your EVMS. So they're probably not even thinking about that. Once it becomes a real project, then you need your operations people and your controls people to sit down and figure out, this is our budget. Okay, we've got this much, this huge piece of the pie. Let's start looking at how it's broken down from the estimators, and does this fit a truly controlled real world budget? Do they have stuff in the right place? Let ops take a look at it. Hopefully you've got the luxury of having ops involved doing constructability during your bid no bid, right, in your estimate, but a lot of times you don't. So how does this estimating budget actually break down to an execution budget? I may be spending a lot of money up front and feel like I'm doing terrible if I don't realize that's just the way this contract is, this scope is. Or the opposite, I may not be spending any and I'm tempted to use that cash to do something else with it. So you change to a different kind of budget and you start to break that out. Now, if you're doing this for the first time and then you're guessing, but if you're tracking what you're doing, then you're adjusting your guess by what you really see. What's the receiving and shakeout? Is it 2%? Is it 10%? Is it 8%? What's typical for us? Am I going to count all the bolts and hardware, or am I just going to throw 8% at it? What is it? You can find some publications that are fairly accurate to start. If you have no data, you can hire people that have done it. You can hire consultants that have done it. And while you're tracking it yourself. Now, let's get back to that, the importance of accuracy. I think it's important for people to understand how you make money and how you lose money. And I've been a superintendent, so I'm not picking on superintendents, but superintendents will sandbag. They will not tell you the truth, not because they're dishonest people or they want to pull the wool over your eyes. But a lot of times they just don't want to deal with everybody in their business. They've done this for plenty of time. They know they're all right. They're sandbagging in case something comes up out of the ordinary. But what that does to hurt everybody is your estimators don't know the real numbers, and your cost control people don't know the real numbers. So if you're always bidding the same kind of work and you're competitive and you're profitable, no problem. But that's nobody's reality. If I get a job that's heavy civil, well, I need to know how I'm actually performing in civil. Maybe I can undercut the competition because, man, we are aces at that. Or maybe, yeah, I really shouldn't bid this because it's heavy civil. We lose our tail on civil all the time. It's just not what we're geared for. So you need to know that granularity. So this all starts with convincing people we need to be honest with each other. We need to be open with each other. So if that superintendent out in the field feels like he's going to get dragged through the mud every time something goes wrong, he's going to protect himself, or she's going to protect herself, and they're going to protect their crew. You need openness. So if you're the type of leader at any level that does penalize people, that loses your cool, that blames it on people and points fingers, and I demand things to be better, you are not going to get accurate, honest reporting. You're behind the 8 ball right from the get-go. You've got to build that dialogue, that trust, and that openness. So if that superintendent tells you, I've hung 6,000 tons of steel, done, complete, rattled up, bought off, and I've got this and I've got that, you can have confidence that that's how much. Now, it's also good to trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan said. So if you're big enough, you can afford it, have some quantity surveyors. Have somebody walk through that job site with a set of drawings and a highlighter. Well, that's the low-tech way to do it. Today you can do it on a tablet. Yes, that's in. No, it's not in. Right? You check your subcontractors that way if it's not self-perform, and you check your own crews that way if it is self-perform.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much here, Ted, that and I mean, you bring such a depth of experience. Like you said, that it could be very industry specific, and for our audience to understand what works well for civil by comparison to what works well for a general contractor and commercial, what by comparison to a general contractor and industrial, are all wildly different from each other in regards to what are the relevant metrics based upon labor management, or how you're actually going to win the work and what type of margins you're actually dealing with. So I just, you bring such a breadth of experience, and I literally do feel like we could go down so much of this, right? I think that we've kind of scratched the surface, but you've just brought up some key highlights that I think for business owners that they have to start somewhere. How you win your work and understanding earned value and placing an emphasis on your schedule are all great starting points. But a part of it too is leading through it appropriately. And I think that's one of the key takeaways, that when you set out to have a set of goals, I'd tell it, people be inquisitive of it first. And I guess what and even what I mean in that is, don't assume that just because somebody could be off on a metric, if you've assigned them a metric that they're responsible for, don't assume that just because it's off that they're not doing their job. There could be something else to it, and you have to be inquisitive of the data. You have to ask the questions, but creating that space to where people can bring forward and bring their ideas and their data and their experience to say, this is what we collectively agree is truth, of how we should go about bidding this work and what's actually going to happen later on. But to this entire point, for business owners to try to build the business past themselves, they have to enable a team, not look at data, in an isolated silo, system, to look at it, with multiple team members providing their input in a safe space too, right? That the team members feel like they can actually talk to this and bring up what is reality rather than just sandbagging 24/7. So, yeah, you've provided a lot of, key takeaways here. Would there be anything else that you'd want our audience to really know about, KPIs, metrics, things that they should be watching in their business with their data, how they would go about it? What do you feel like are some key takeaways for them?
I think whatever you're measuring, again, it has to work for you. You don't work for it. So is it driving your decisions in a beneficial way? And so ask yourself those questions periodically. Is this data useful for me? Then don't ever lose sight of the fact that it's not just it's not just things. Every bit of this is tied to some kind of behavior or behavioral tendency. And so you've got to measure the health of your organization too. That's where your culture comes in. That's where your ethos and your values come in, because it is just at the end of the day, it's describing behavior. And are you getting the behavior you want to hit the markers that are important to you? And if not, I had a boss who would say, if somebody gets hurt, whose fault is it? I said, well, it depends. It could be their. I said, no, 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 no. Somebody gets hurt. It's my fault. Period. Somebody gets hurt on your crew, it's your fault. Period. Um, and that's, I'm sure some people right now are saying, yeah, but people do stupid things. Yes, they do. They do. But if you stop understanding it's your fault or it's your zone, then you are dependent on them to do something to fix it. You take your own power away to make decisions and to affect things. So if saying it's my fault makes people uneasy, okay, well then it's mine. It's my opportunity. It's mine. And so, if you're using KPIs, you've got to realize that this tells a story of the activities of people, of human beings. And if you lose sight of that, you're throwing away one of the biggest assets you have. We hear that term all the time, right? Our people are our greatest resource. Okay, well they are. They're the ones that are running that pipe or pouring that concrete or making that decision or negotiating that change order. So when you look at this KPI, it's not just how is the business doing? How are my people doing? What are my people doing that's influencing these KPIs? If I want a successful company, I will have people that are engaged, are taking ownership. And so what am I doing to build that end of it? And that will have a great influence on what the KPIs look like.
No, you know, I think of it best, like, especially like a civil contractor, um, you're going to have the same equipment. The equipment, you can buy it from any dealership. You're going to have the same exact equipment. The people are really your difference maker, right? I mean, your execution of that project and the people involved in execution of that project are your real difference maker. And so, you just bring up a lot of relevance to that, that at the end of the day, it has to be a tool. It's a tool. It's not an end all be all. It's a tool to help your people, be able to do a better job. And it has to work for your people too. Not just for an owner. It has to work for your people. And so, yeah, Ted, thank you for your insights. I think you've really, poured just a lot of wisdom into the thought process behind this as to how to relate this, especially from a leadership aspect, which is what you're so passionate about. And, yeah, I just really appreciate your words of experience and, your wisdom into this. And, yeah, I would like to see you on this podcast more. I think we're going to have to, because of your wisdom and experience, we're probably going to have to piece out, and parse out, little episodes where we deep dive onto some of these things even in further detail. But, yeah, just really appreciate having you on and the things that you could share with our audience.
Well, this is fun. Thank you, Mason. I appreciate the invite. I had a good time. Yeah, I'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, but, you have to bring the Bucky's water cup. I think I'm
Yeah,
going to have to get one of those that I
I've,
just don't
I've
have
got
enough desk space for it.
I think I've got 3 of them. I got to change them out. I got to wash it every once in a while.
Yeah, but I'm worried about losing desk space is all. That thing was massive. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Ted. Really
Thank you.
appreciate you.
You have a great
Yep.
day.
Hi, everyone. So if you enjoyed today's episode and you found value or it raised some questions for you about the next best steps for managing your finances in your construction business, please reach out to us at bradycfo.com. There's a contact page there where you can fill out and that will come straight over to us.
Either that, or you can personally find me on LinkedIn. My name is Mason Brady, and feel free to send me a message, and happy to chat and talk through anything you're facing today, and happy to provide some advice. So thank you all. Appreciate it.